third and final geek out, ending the Star Trek Coda series of books. And I took some time with this, as I'm sure many have, because most few of us that have read it and enjoyed it, because it does take time. And there's a reason for part of the tedium. While the Swallow book I could read in a day, it had its purpose to lead up to where this would go and the significance of it. And these are some notes I have on the side that I want to go through. I'm not going to read them out loud, but they're going to prompt me to know what to talk about. So this is how I'm going to do a bit of a deep dive that's somewhat organized. And I spent a good part of the day just reflecting on the book. I don't necessarily want to react to it. I watched a couple vids on YouTube, and I'm like, something's off here. You're misreading it, or it's just easy to react and you know, be whatever you want. But for a true lover of this stuff, a series of books like this gets us to a point where we can see versions of these characters at their best because they're at an ending. That's kind of where I want to go today. I think so let's start. I'm sure I'll have some breaks. Lot of polls that you can read on your own. These are my raw notes. This is how I organize my framework of mind. You can see all the other books I've written about just to myself that maybe one day I could do something with academically. But, you know, after I read a book, this is the time I spend writing about it so I can remember a bit, and it just doesn't, you know, fall apart. I'll have friends that'll ask me, you know, what I read, and I'll talk to them about what I read, but I can't remember it. So this, especially with Trek books, because it can be argued, and it's true, a lot of them are forgettable, and that's unfortunate. So I have to write about some of the beats that I see, because as I argued before, at least I'm pretty sure I argued, I look at Trek fiction as a meta-narrative commentary on Trek, where the fortunate authors who do get to write published Trek fiction that's been approved, right, have the opportunity to grapple with some larger issues in a bit of a meta-discourse that becomes this narrative. And there's been no narrative like the one we've had for the past 20-some years with the post-Nemesis Trekverse. It's been a fun ride, and it has not been a waste of time, because all things come to an end. And those that would think, you know, I hate this book because it just ruins everything, I feel you on that. But there are plenty of clues throughout. And you can see that Mac had to undo some of his great work. So, you know, you feel for him too. But there are clues littered throughout this that say to me, this is one version, why can't it exist elsewhere? But to give this particular thread an ending is worthwhile, because again, you get to see the folks at their best. So, what direction will I take? I don't know. But here we go. So I start with some of the standouts, some of the beats at the beginning. Often when I write about a book, I'm fresh from reading the end of it, so I'll start with the end, and then I'll go through some of the beats that I've circled. No doc cam today, because I have my notes. The doc cam's still downstairs. Again, I already said this, difficult task, but I swear, if you just have this book and find it daunting to read, or if you stopped at any point, I would recommend going straight to chapter 40, because all that happens in the book is not as important as what we see in chapter 40. And that is an almost Vonnegut-like, and I talked about Borges in my second video, one of my videos. Borges and his, forking paths and talking to other versions of yourself, and always thinking about what if I did this or did this and did this. And what's so awesome is you have the final chapter, somewhat maudlin it may be, discussing the various versions of Picard that we've seen, and some I didn't even get, so maybe some that we haven't seen, but maybe they exist in book form. Uh, Time tripping in a almost Slaughterhouse-Five style. Only this time the time tripping happens with various versions of Picard. And this is all spoilers, by the way. I'm going to put that on the title. I'm not even going to bother with that. Again, these various versions of Picard walking through these alternative realities he had. And it comes down to, and we're using his aromatic syndrome as a way to navigate all of this. And this is touching. But, we get back to here is the moment, exist here. And Picard's asking, I don't know how to say her name. It's from the movie with F. Murray Abraham. But anyway, when they stop time and the Baku folks, and this is called her Angie for short, he in this thread, he goes there to heal himself from the aromatic syndrome, but the syndrome is giving him insights into these other realities. The same type of realities that the Riker character within this book was dealing with, the push and pull. So again, they don't say aromatic in the television series Picard because after reading a book like this, it forces me to watch Picard again. That's a whole other story, but I'm going to look at it for what it is. But the syndrome is real in a lot of different realities, so here we go. But I found it, and I have my quote here, a touching meditation on life, living, death, mourning. That's the context in which Mac is writing. And I find chapter 40 to be powerful all on its own. And if we all have our favorite character, Picard's obviously the through line in this whole narrative. We wouldn't have these books without Picard because of the TV show, the series. And I do like, I'm off track. I do like how he steps back in the previous two books because he has no Enterprise to command, so he's taking orders and he's fulfilling the role of a crew, any crewman. But then he steps up again. So we are exploring most of this through Picard's perspective. And there are some neat beats in chapter 40. And all I got to do is say, if you're annoyed at what's going on, you think it's too dark, it's too bleak, it's not Picard series bleak. Again, that argument goes in a box over here for right now. But this comes together. This comes together with Picard just time tripping, going through different quantum realities, and it ends with Benny Russell writing these narratives. And the idea that Benny Russell is writing every Star Trek book is just a great beat to play with. And I'm sure any Trek author has a lot of fun with this. And the realization that, especially after a lifetime of reading comic books, one has just to acknowledge that we can have our character templates that exist in different particular ways, and here's yet another. And the good news is we got 20 years to see where this may all go. And I'm happy to have been along for a lot of that ride. And there are still some I need to pick up on. I didn't go anywhere with the Voyager books, and perhaps there's an opportunity there. So I like this quote here with Benny Russell, page 421, the future of infinite possibilities. And it's real. They're all real. And the all in italics. It's a lot of fun. He knows there are new stories that need to be told about these heroes, about lives that they've led in other universes, all of them no more and no less real than those chronicled so far. So there's one of many openings for you to enjoy if you really don't feel like you've wasted 20 years reading these books, because you haven't. Because much like Borges' infinite possibilities and forking paths, why can't all this be real? All right. Now, let's play with the rest of the book as just a geek out on a plot level and all this, and I'll come full circle at the end. Thanks for sticking with me. There's a method to the madness. I'm going to go over 10 minutes because I just need to truly have some positivity in my day, and that's what this book is. A lot of long quotes here. Hopefully I'm not violating anybody. I'm not going to read them out loud. but I need this to organize my thoughts. So when I was going through the book and finding the pages I circled as I was reading, that's how I usually figure out what to write about. And depending on how excited I get, some days I'll spend many hours just pulling and writing quotes for myself and then trying to comment on those quotes. Some days I won't. And because I did YouTube videos, I still have a whole stack of books to write about for myself, but I'll get to those when I get to those. Okay. So I labeled this section TARDIS, only for lack of a better term, time and relative dimension and space, and in this case, quantum realities. But here are the clues throughout, at least, and there are more, but these are the ones I picked up. So it's important to see that although this was a splinter universe that was kind of artificially created and happened by accident, that doesn't mean it's any more or less real. And we use the device of the prophets to really, truly appreciate that. So right away, page 27, Sisko's like, the prophets exist in many dimensions all at once and many timelines. They're all of them. So prophets go beyond dimension and space. That's nice to see. Again, not versions of them, but truly them, the same in every cosmos, including mirror realities, quantum realities, parallel realities. More on that as we go. So this is how I found out. This is, what I see in tying what Sisko has to say right away on page 27, what the relationship Kira has as the hand of the prophets in this novel verse, and how it comes to fruition at the end. Where Kira is discussing with the prophets are talking to Kira through this Sisko Vader, and no other branch of time is the Kira called our hand. Only in this lone echo of time. Beautiful phrase from Mac, lone echo of time, which is exactly what this is. I would have preferred the book be called The Lone Echo of Time, but Oblivion's Gate, okay, you gotta do what you gotta do. We have extended our hand into linear matters. It's a great quote. So now, this is the sliver of reality that it matters. What happens in this matters. It would be a great deep cut that's never going to happen if we found, because if I missed it, I must have missed it, but I don't really see Kira's death in the last chapters. Now, I admit it was getting kind of tedious for my read. I'm like, okay, there's this big showdown at the wormhole. I'm like, this may be one too many beats to get to where we need to go, but I get the drama. But in my head, I'm like I'm kind of getting impatient, right? So I don't know if Kira really got her death. I'll have to go discover that, but I'm kind of hoping she didn't, because I can see this version of Kira just kind of making a small cameo somehow and just going another way. I was hoping maybe there's some remnant of this kind of universe that could sneak his head in later on in novel form, or film form would be a ultimate geek out. But we know what we know. So I like that lone echo beat. That's not going anywhere. We should understand that. So I see these clues scattered throughout. It's there. Mac, Ward, company, all the Trek authors in the last 20 years, they don't want to see this end. But if you watch some of the interviews, hey, they got this great opportunity. Make the most of it, and they did. This was a very satisfying experience. Okay, now is the minutiae of how we're doing this, which is just a real geek out level thing. So I did one of my earlier videos on this trilogy with my thoughts of quantum realities based on maybe my comic book reading experience, looking at Borges, and my assumption based on the Christopher L. Bennett time travel books that, these timelines can collapse onto themselves over the grand span of time. I'm not saying that's not a incorrect interpretation, but that's not where we're going finally in book 3. Okay, so now we've discovered that this is a temporary timeline that's fractured. It's a splinter timeline. I'm not even looking at my notes here. And I got a little bit about the specifics. This comes at the first contact, and it makes the prelude make more sense because it says second splinter and not the first. Okay, it makes more sense. I wasn't on board when I was reading it. But after the whole thing's over, I'm like, okay, this is perfect. You couldn't have done it a better way. Because it's not enough if you have an in-game trilogy where these heroes, our heroes, need to do something to save a wider multiverse. And so what you need is to say that we're all a part of an accidental splinter that's going to collapse regardless. And these Denevians from the Time Zero two-parter in TNG, these Denevians are already taking advantage of it, and we already have a partial collapse. And we know that because the mirror universe that's tied to this splinter, so it's a splinter mirror, it's the same thing. They are one. Are seeing this. So I love this. Page 44, 50, 51. You get all the background you can geek out on what's going on. And the geeks like me are going to love it. If you're just a casual Trek reader, I think you can just accept it and move on. But it does make some sense. That's the good news. And what I love the most is that Ward and company have found that weak point in the writing of First Contact and made it their own, because it is the weakest point of the book. Because traditionally, when we do the time travel stuff, most folks go back the same way they came. But then at the end of First Contact, it's like, so Moore and Braga write themselves into a hole, which I'm sure that they admitted to in the commentary. I don't know, but how are we getting these folks back? Because they go through a temporal vortex created by the Borg. How can they recreate that? That's kind of a skip and jump, and that's a weakness in that script. But you can see how happy accidents happen. Ward just jumps on that. Like, this is our opening. We're gonna do it here. And I like to be a fly on the wall with the conversation at any con, and like, okay, where do we enter? You know, I can imagine the conversation. Do we enter with Nemesis? Is there something? Should we go a Deep Space Nine angle? You know, where is the splinter point? This is as good as any, right? Because we get that 2 seconds of Borgified Earth, right, when they're going in, and it tracks. It makes sense in that time that Riker and company are helping Zefram Cochrane. You know, time is in flux until they get the Phoenix in the air and the Vulcans arrive. So that's plenty of opportunity for that parallel Borgified Earth to keep it open. But in doing so, they create this accidental branch that then becomes the novelverse, wherever that officially began. That's always debatable because, you know, all these books are in flux now. I'm sure a lot's still going to be used later on somehow. Maybe these ancillary characters that come straight out of these books will crop up again in different forms. I mean, they're out there. We can use them. All right, so what I'm just reading here is just all the geeky stuff. So it's nice at the First Contact, this Borg timeline. You have a conversation with Wesley about these consequences of these fractures. And the novelverse is known as this First Splinter timeline. It should be intact, but it's not because it's artificial. There we go. Now, there's plenty of suspension of disbelief here, sure. But again, it tracks. It tracks back to the Mirror Universe collections, the Fractured Myriad Universes collection that came out in the mid-2000s sometime. Those Mirror Universe books. It Ward's Headlong Flight, which I stopped to read, you know, as I was reading the first book of Coda. This alternative Enterprise crew, you know, meets their demise in moments asunder right away, and you can see that happening. But it is a great setup for what's going on. So even the crew in this seem to be an offshoot of an already temporary fractured timeline. Who wouldn't have fun with this? This is awesome. This is how it should be, right? All this can exist if you just. I love the quantum realities. I don't think it's a fad. People are just because it's in a Spider-Man movie doesn't mean it's new. It's finally they're catching on to. We can follow this. I mean, this gets right back to DC continuity, DC Comics continuity, multiple Earths and whatnot. And I got a little bit of this down here because. I like this line about this timeline was produced by a catastrophic artificial temporal fracture. Beautiful line. We should read it out loud all the time. So I found that a great way to move these quantum realities around and use it. And it reminds me of, Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC Comics 1985, where the idea was to collapse all this, but it's part of a larger omniverse that includes all the Marvel crossovers and then other company. So you cannot have. Long story short, in all places, the Batman Planetary book. I don't know when it came out. I did a little link to it, the snowflake analogy. But there was a nice in-joke in that book where they call it 1985. What happened there? And it's just like partial collapse. And that almost says that the multiple Earths we see up until 1985 in the DCU could be explained away as this, artificial temporal fracture. And then we can look at the Anti-Monitor the same way we can look at the Vians. I'm sure I'm butchering the name because I want to say something else. But, I saw shades of Crisis all the way in here. I could see some nice subtle hints to, oh, look, is this Pariah? Is this who Pariah? It was a lot of fun. I had a ball. So the Splinter universe, and I keep writing now, our heroes are doing this. The goal becomes, okay, we know we're not stable, but if this keeps happening, it's going to reach those stable timelines, so we need to be the heroes. And they're going to be, and that's what makes this worthwhile. It makes it a worthwhile read. And then in these moral dilemmas you have throughout the rest of the book, these characters are sitting in for us, especially if anyone's read every one of these books for 20 years, and I am not that person. Again, I focused mainly on the Deep Space Nine novels and went through it, and then I love the crossovers. I think I finally stopped it at the Fall books, and I read the Enterprise books because they were more self-contained, but nonetheless, that wasn't a waste. Even Lyle's pushing back on Data is like, why why is the what makes this so special over here? Plenty of folks might say that about Star Trek Picard, right? But that doesn't matter. We're stuck here. We're a novel verse. We're by our very nature tie-in media that makes us a catastrophic artificial temporal fracture. That's what Star Trek novels are. I would call them temporary too. In the comics as well, So it's great conversation, good beats, page 174, 223 and 4. And we might be doing this to save an emanation of time that looks nothing like ours, that turned out to be different in potentially infinite ways, and Data's only answer is yes, because we must do it. There's no way to save our timeline without condemning a multiple of others. And I'm sure I have some typos in here that I'll fix, but these are my own notes I'm sharing with you. Maybe that's a bad thing. All right. Here's where, just as a small geek out, there may be, at the end of season 3 of Disco, where they're discussing the splinter with the mirror universe, and 1,000 years later, the mirror universe and that timeline are diverging. This line kind of pushes back on that. They might have written it beforehand. I don't know the context, but it's, that's the fun with these novels. That was the fun of these novels, when the TV series does something, the task becomes how to absorb it, how to work with it. And the novel folks do it well. They do it the best. Because they may feel a particular way about writing, about what's going on, but their task is to say, okay, it's here, it exists. How do I work with it? And that's a nice problem-solving strategy to take when you're in the creative process. And this gets back to Mac's Destiny trilogy. Just wipe the Borg right out. And what happens when you bring them back? And then we have to look at a great line. I did sigh a bit, but So Picard's talking to this new Borg queen, and he comes to the conclusion that the Borg origin is far more complex. And there's plenty in the TV verse to support this, right? Borg go back in time. Who's the Borg? What they're coming from? There's the episode of Enterprise. If that one went south, we could have had a whole different Borg. I digress. So the origin might have generated multiple conflicting origins for themselves, mired their beginnings in a paradox, or even have a cross-pollinated different times. Beautiful, beautiful. A lot of fun. I'm sure everybody got a smile when they had that. Just a small beat. So this OC, this Omicron that Wesley has, for a while, somewhere on page 244, it reminded me of. I'm aging myself, but Automan, that very short-lived Tron ripoff TV series, his sidekick was called Cursor, and he used to jump around and move, and I just had a Cursor flashback. All right, so I got oh god, this is the greatest geek out quote in the book, and there are a lot of them, but it's a data quote, but I don't know if I can even read it with a straight face, but using the orb as a calibrating beacon across dimensions and space-time, we must establish mutually canceling subharmonic resonance frequencies here and in the Denevian's core in order to trigger a paradox-free temporal recursion that will retroactively unmake this timeline. Yeah, that should be the opening of like a poetry reading or a play, but that's beautiful tech-to-tech language. Well done, whoever brought that. I hope that just wasn't Mac alone, but points on that. Well done. Okay, maybe there's and I only saw this after watching a couple reaction vids to this. Why so much death? Well, that's what this is about. It's a modeling book. And consider the time frame. Consider the pandemic we're in, and what loss is. If not loss on a personal level, then a loss of change that's making folks kind of frightening and scared and worried, and the state of the world. And that's why we read Trek, right? For an optimistic point of view, and we have our heroes sacrifice themselves for very noble cause, way beyond their own self-interest at the end of the day. That's the time frame. That's where we're looking. And, this got me. I was a bit choked up in the previous books, especially after the death of Ezri Dax, because I was really into seeing Ezri as the captain of the ship and watching this one-season character really grow into her own in these books. And then to have her not necessarily the death that took place, but the reaction after it, and the Swallow book, the memorial, and all this. But I tell you, it wasn't until Worf and Alexander and Kalar all met their ends that it got me. It got to me. And the line about preparing a feast in Stovokor because I'm still a family of warriors is coming. That line's worth the price of any admission right there. Any I have no criticism about this book. Just it went a little long, but so what? I've read plenty of long books, but this line really brought it home. And I never, and this is what I write about here, I'll just try to put in my own words. I have never really asked the question, hey, who's my favorite character in Trek? It just doesn't come to mind because I look at it holistically. But it looks like Worf is, because my reaction to Worf, and Klingons are overdone, and I've done a little bit of a cantankerous blah 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 about the Klingons overuse, but Worf really ties so much of Trek together. At least 2 series. I think Worf is the most. Worf and Spock, are linchpins of the Trek universe, and seeing the end of Worf like this, anyone who really sees Trek close to their to who they are, and I've lived with these characters for most of my life. I know that sounds insane to just casual fans, but some of these folks are really people. They're fleshed out. They can be real, and no one more so than Worf. Um, and there you have it. So I mean, go check out page 330. You see the end of Worf, and it's something else. It got to me. I hope it got to you too. Really puts these books in context. And I don't know who reads Trek books. I know I read Trek book. I'm pretty diehard about it. I know that reviews of Trek books don't get a lot of hits on YouTube from what I'm seeing. So it's a very narrow audience, no doubt. And yeah, it's true. A lot of them are just candy. They're quick to consume. A lot of them are forgettable. For a while in my life, I was like, how many more Trek books do I need to read about shuttle crashing on planet? And what do we do? And a lot of this. And that's what was so refreshing about this extended narrative for 20 years that we're unlikely to see again. And it's something the Star Wars fans can understand too, with their extended books. And I read Heir to the Empire when it first came out, but Star Wars wasn't my total thing, not like this universe. So yeah, it is real. This is all fiction. None of this is real, and it all is real. So be happy with that, and think about Benny Russell writing these for us all in some other reality. And that, after the death of Worf, that takes me right back to chapter 40, and these beats with Picard looking back on his various lives, and how one can feel. So it does bring these different realities together, and it shows you a wider view of this world, its extended world, and its extended world. So that's the fun you can have with the quantum reality beats, and know that, and I'm convinced that we saw the end of a splinter reality, one that wasn't meant to survive because it was artificial. That does not discount in any way that everything else up to the events in this book haven't happened in another quantum reality that is stable. That's the good news for folks that are really into the narrative, that feel like just because I've read these books that ruins everything. That shouldn't ruin everything at all. Take it from a lifelong comic book fan. Nothing has disappeared. Those books are still on my shelf. I can go and read them. So I'm getting into a big hyper time thing, but this has nothing to do with it, because this is just this turns out when we read Oblivion's Gate, or even if we go back to Headlong Flight in the Ward books, we see some fracturing. Or that doesn't discount that the alternate crew in this book, not necessarily the same one in this book. They might come from a stable timeline. So that gets back to my whole thing. The timelines can eventually come together, assuming that they are stable, and all the hilarity and fun that can ensue with that. So I'm feeling pretty positive. This is not the end of Trek books. I feel that it may be the end of this kind of serialization in the Trek books. So we might have to fall back to self-contained stories that the center doesn't quite hold on it. Maybe not with the TOS books, but yeah, I don't know. But the good news is, I can't imagine, and unless you're real diehard and points to you, but plenty of us have plenty to go back to and read if we want. So I got enough of the Voyager books. I think I can start putting them together. I haven't read the Titan books, and I haven't read the Next Gen books. So I got a lot of books to read if I want to explore these characters taking this path. And that gets us right back to the forking paths. And considering different aspects of ourselves and the choices we made, that's not meant for us to ruminate and feel like we made bad choices, but it does give us a larger perspective of, in the end, maybe we'll all meet up at the destination where we are. Now I'm just reminded of, we get what we need, right? Not necessarily what we wanted. And you know that's the reality of understanding these quantum realities. I digress. I think I've done enough, but that's I wanted to go beyond reaction just to enjoy what can be done with licensed properties in fiction. They can be more than just superficial, and this is a hell of a run for any type of tie-in property. And I'm glad that in many moments of my life, from 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 the tiny to the here I am, that I can always go back to a Trek novel, and none of them are going anywhere. And that's my 2 cents on that for today. So go give a thumbs up to David Mack and James Swallows and Dayton Ward and all the awesome Trek writers who are doing these books. And I'm glad that they do have input into a lot of what we see on the screen too. I know Max and the consultant on Lower Decks, Christian Bear, of course, is doing the Picard series. So yeah, I'm happy, and you should be too. So that's Endgame, and there's nothing wrong with calling it that. So there's my notes. That's my mindset. I feel like I've gone over my time, but I hope you stayed to listen, and I don't think I plan to cut anything. I'm just going to put this out, no filter, because I had a blast. So thanks, Trek Books. It's always nice to know that you're there. I'm Trek Dave. I'll get to my trivia again, and that's all I have for today.